Game Boy. The Game Boy. Probably Nintendo's most important console ever, and kind of the reason they exist and are actually even popular today. Let's get into it. What a neat little brick this thing is. I've got a collection of these things, and today I just kind of want to go over the Game Boy, just talk about it, talk about how I feel about this and its brethren. So yeah, let's go over it. So this right here is the very first original Game Boy. It is heavy as a brick, the shape of a brick, and in terms of technology, about the same technical scale as a brick. Yeah, this thing isn't very impressive, though at the time, this thing was amazing, and you wouldn't think it. So at the time, many different companies were trying to bring out their own handhelds, trying to break into that portable market. And really, the only ones that were successful were Nintendo with the Game Boy. Atari tried with the Lynx, and well, Sega tried. We won't talk about Sega's attempt. But Nintendo were the only ones to actually be anywhat successful in their endeavors with, well, this thing. Why was it popular? Had no right to be. I mean, look at this thing. It's big and hefty. It doesn't have a backlit screen. It doesn't even have any color to it. It's just green. It's monotone. Why'd this thing win? Well, it's actually because of all of its flaws. This thing won because of all its flaws. Because Nintendo didn't implement them. Meaning they could make these things cheaper. Meaning people could buy them for cheaper. Meaning people bought more of these. People were more likely to buy a Game Boy literally just due to price alone. So that's the main reason why this thing was successful. But the console itself, it's alright. I mean, for a handheld, at the time, I could imagine this not to be that bad. It has your game slot here, takes, infamously, 4 AA batteries to turn on, which is, a lot. But, it's alright, you got your volume, little scroll wheel here. You have a scroll wheel for volume and stuff. So you get your volume scroll wheel, you've got your extension thing for multiplayer if you want to trade Pokemon, mainly that was used for. Your on-off switch here as to which you can turn it on. And it'll play my intro. Or, you've got your contrast here, which will make it either easier or more difficult to see, and again, infamously, no backlit screen. However, this thing's alright. But, it does get better from here. Game Boy Pocket! This isn't getting better from here. So, the Game Boy Pocket, I've actually got Tetris in it right now. So, yeah. But, the Game Boy Pocket was a revision of the original Game Boy, and it is a hell of a lot better. The screen is larger when you turn it on. It's still not backlit, but the screen is easier to be able to see because of its size, and also the fact that it's not a disgusting puke green color. Additionally, it's a hell of a lot smaller just in general. The console is like a tiny thing, tiny little ant compared to the monstrosity that was the original Game Boy. Actually, as a comparison, here is the size difference between these two. This thing is really, really small compared to the original thing. Like, now you understand why I call this one a brick. Regardless, however, I mean, the Game Boy Pocket, it was a really good revision. It has a better screen, it has a smaller form factor, it's actually pocketable. The other Game Boy, well, yeah, it was a portable console. You couldn't really put it in your pocket. You could put it in a backpack, or maybe some sort of really, really big pocket on some really big coat. But realistically, you're not going to be putting that into any normal-sized pocket. This thing, however, I can put this into a normal pocket. I have put this into a normal pocket. You can take this thing wherever you want to go. So it was a really good upgrade from the original one. But there is another Game Boy that not as many people know about that was a huge upgrade. And it was only ever released in Japan. The Game Boy Light. Now, when you think of light in a Nintendo console right now, you'll probably think of, oh, light is in a smaller form factor, sleeker, maybe more portable, like the DS Lite or the Switch Lite. Not for this thing. As you can see, this isn't light L-I-T-E, this is light L-I-G-H-T. This thing has a backlight. Yeah, so you can turn it on normally, and, you know, it will turn on. Or, you can turn on its backlight. Now, it is super difficult to see on the camera itself, but there is a light mode. You can see right there. That's the light mode. You switch to there, it's on. Switch to there, it's on light mode. That's all it is. It is about the form factor of a Game Boy Color, which we've not quite gotten to yet, but it is about the form factor of that. It's, bigger than the Game Boy Pocket, but still a huge amount smaller from the original Game Boy. Takes 2 AA's, and I forgot to mention, by the way, the Pocket takes 2 AA's, so it takes, I believe, the smallest batteries. You know, it's got your game slot there. This will play any Game Boy games, even though it was only released in Japan. This will play Game Boy games from America, from Europe, from anywhere. And when I bought this thing off eBay, I actually got the box for it as well, so that's decently rare, actually. This is a decently rare console that I have. But, yeah, the Game Boy Light, it's, you know, you got your volume slider thing here, you got your extension there, you got, again, your light, and some other stuff. You got your contrast and all, you got your buttons. That's all fine. But what could be better than light? I'll tell you what's better than light. Color. The Game Boy Color. This thing is only a little bit smaller than the Light, and it's mainly because the Light's battery cover is really weird and has 2 ridges on it. But the Color is... It's weird. Nintendo themselves counts this as just a part of the normal Game Boy line. They count this as a revision of the original Game Boy instead of its own separate console. Even though the Game Boy Color adds color, which is a completely brand new feature, and also is in a completely different form factor to the original Game Boy, and also plays exclusive Game Boy Color games. I mean, I personally consider it to be its own console, but what's mostly annoying about the fact that Nintendo considers this to be a Game Boy and not its own thing and just a revision, is you can never find exact sales numbers. No one knows the exact sales numbers of what the Color sold apart from presumably Nintendo themselves, but I won't know and none of you will. So, yeah. Though you can make some general estimations. This thing probably sold around 40 million units, roughly as an estimate. But you know, look at this thing. So, Game Boy Color, it's very simple. It's the same form factor as the Light, just a little bit smaller. And, you know, it's a bit bigger than the Pocket. You turn it on, and it does have color. It does just about show up on the camera. You can just about see it there. Color. So, yeah, it does what it says. It had some exclusive games for it, and also it did add color to normal Game Boy games as well. Instead of them being the just monotone colors that they have, they actually got some blues and whites and I think yellows in all of them as well, because, well, the Game Boy Color could do that. There's not too much to say about the Game Boy Color. I mean, it's pretty simple, you know, it's just a Game Boy, but it adds color. But you know what would be even better than that? Playing Mario Kart. And that's where the Game Boy Advance comes in. Game Boy Advance, this thing can play Mario Kart. It's got Super Circuit. Yeah, the Game Boy Advance, this was a very big stray away from the original Game Boy line. This is the first Game Boy after the original Nintendo considers to be its full own thing. It's not just a revision. This is a brand new console. And, well, this is the original Advance. Now, this is a modded Advance that has been reshelled, as you can see, to make it look like the original Game Boy. Also, I myself have added in a USB-C mod. I added that one in. That's actually not too difficult. You just get a rechargeable battery, put it in there, then get a custom cover off of eBay for like 2 pennies. This is not that expensive. And also, something that this console did not originally come with, but, you know, I can't really remove. A backlight. This thing has a backlight. The original Game Boy Advance never had a backlight, though. It was like all the other ones, except for the Game Boy Light, and yeah, you had to have a light shine over this thing to be able to see what you're doing. And as much as it worked for the other Game Boys, because, well, they were cheaper, by this point, people were kind of giving Nintendo a bit of an odd look for not adding a backlight still. I mean, they were this far in, this is like the 5th or something revision they've now had. There should be a backlight now that's permanent, that stays with the consoles. And yeah, that was a big issue with this thing. Oh yeah, also added shoulder buttons. They did add a backlight eventually though. With this thing. This is the Game Boy Advance SP, the first revision of the original Game Boy Advance. And guess what this thing is? Guess what it came with? A built-in backlight. Yeah, this was a major revision, especially considering, unlike the Game Boy Light, this released outside of Japan. This released in Europe, in North America, Japan itself, obviously. This was a worldwide release. So this thing, everyone now, they all had a backlight, and you can press this button to turn it off for some reason. I don't get why you would ever want to have the backlight off. But yeah, and something you may have also noticed about the SP. It was the first one to have a foldable clamshell design, which would be later seen in Nintendo's DS and 3DS lines. It's a Game Boy Advance SP. In terms of form factor, I definitely prefer the normal Game Boy Advance over this thing. I mean, mine has a backlight, so I really only ever use the normal one. But, you know what? I do still like the SP. It folds down, it's a lot smaller, you can fit it in your pocket without having to have the screen exposed, so it's a lot safer, it's less likely to get damaged. The shoulder buttons are kind of weak and flimsy, and Nintendo pulled a very Apple move here by removing the headphone jack. In 2001. They got rid of the headphone jack in 2001. What the hell were they thinking? But, yeah, the Game Boy Advance SP, you know? Very simple. And, fun fact, there are actually 2 models of the SP. There's this one, which is the AGS 001, which has, you know, it's got a serviceable backlight. It works, you know, it's better than nothing. But there's actually also another one of the Game Boy Advance SP, with the model name AGS 101. And the difference between the two is that this one, you know, it's got a backlight, it works and all, but the 101 has a full IPS backlight, which is the type of backlight on my other Game Boy Advance I'd modded in, but it had it built into the console. And as you can probably tell, the other one was a lot brighter, it's a lot better, and there's a model of the Game Boy Advance SP that has that, so yeah. Now, it's a lot rarer than the normal SPs, don't get me wrong. I mean, this one is far more common than the one with the IPS screen, but they do exist out there, and yeah, they do have slightly better screens. Alright, moving on to the last ever Game Boy. This was the last Game Boy Nintendo ever made. Game Boy Micro. Yeah, this thing, this was released not in 2001 with all its, you know, last-gen Game Boy brethren, but instead in 2004, after the DS released. Why would anyone buy this? The DS could play Game Boy Advance games. But you know what? I know exactly why people would buy this. Look how small it is! This thing also has the brightest, best screen, by the way, I just wanted to point that out. Out of all the Game Boys, this is not even modded. Well, it kind of is modded. I have, as you can see, broken into this thing. Accidentally broke the shell, and I will need to replace it at some point, because, yeah, the faceplate, it broke off. Yeah, that's another thing about this thing. Faceplates. The Game Boy Micro, its main feature was the fact that it's, well, absolutely minuscule, and also that it has interchangeable faceplates. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean you can get a stick type thing, and if you poke at these two holes, this faceplate here will pop off, and yeah, you can change out the faceplate. You know, you had camo variants and other variants and tons of different faceplate variants, but the main point about this is the fact that, you know, it's customizable. Also, it couldn't play any Game Boy or Game Boy Color games. Yeah, something you have to know about the Game Boys up to this point is, especially with the Game Boy Advance line, all the Game Boy Advances could play previous gen Game Boy games, and, well, as much as I consider the Game Boy Color to be its own separate console, it could also play normal Game Boy games. So, these were all backwards compatible. Except for this one. This can only play GBA games. For example, I've got Mario Kart Super Circuit here. I can put that in. It goes in just fine. Turn it on. Turns on fine. Yeah. Mario Kart works. Turns on. You can barely see it on camera, but it is there. So that works. However, if I try to put Tetris in, you can't do it. There is no putting any sort of Tetris or original Pokemon or anything in this thing. They literally will not go in. You can put them in the slot, but they'll just fall out again. So, yeah. And considering, again, the DS was already out by this point, and this was not much cheaper than the DS, and the DS could already play Game Boy Advance games, plus the entire DS library. Yeah, it's no surprise this thing only sold around 2 million units. Yeah, 2 million units, this thing did not sell very well, but you know what? I think it is such a interesting little piece of Nintendo kit because of, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's the smallest Nintendo handheld, or actually just Nintendo console ever. I mean, the games themselves, the games are bigger than the screen. They are actually bigger than the screen, which is honestly pretty funny. You know, it's such a tiny little console, and I think that's why I like it so much, is because how goofy and small and weird it is. It's very Nintendo. But, yeah, that's it. So, what's the final verdict on the Game Boys? Well, the final verdict is, these things built Nintendo. I know I really didn't mention it much in the video, but the reason that Nintendo really is popular today is because of these. Whenever Nintendo's own consoles were failing or not doing as well as they should have, like during the N64 or especially the GameCube, these kind of picked up the slack. And additionally, these led Nintendo through the path of dominating the handheld market, which would eventually lead to the DS after these, and the 3DS after that, and then, well, eventually the Switch. So if you are sat there playing Mario Kart 8 Deluxe one day, remember, the reason you can do that on your Switch is because of these things. So yeah, final verdict. The original Game Boy is literally a goddamn brick. You could throw that at someone and it would kill them.